So many moms feel stuck and isolated, like they've got to keep it all together and can't say how hard it really is. On Let's Get Real, we talk about the real stuff, motherhood, mental health, and everything in between, so you don't feel like you have to carry it alone anymore. Because in order to heal, we have to get real. If you're feeling overwhelmed, grab the Overwhelmed Moms Guide. It's totally free and made to help you feel like yourself again. The link is in the show notes. Let's jump in. Many of us are living inside a story we haven't taken the time to understand. We move from one season of life to the next, making decisions, reacting to challenges, and repeating patterns, without ever slowing down long enough to ask deeper questions like, why do I respond the way I do? Or what themes keep showing up in my life? Or what is my story actually telling me? Often the biggest breakthroughs come not from pushing harder, but from stepping back and seeing our life with more clarity. Today, we're talking about how storytelling and journaling can help us do exactly that. Today's guest is Kristan Swan, creator of the guided journal Spaghetti on the Wall, a tool designed to help people reflect on their experiences, identify patterns in their lives, and make sense of the stories that shape them. Kristan's work focuses on helping people slow down, ask better questions, and develop the kind of self-awareness that leads to clearer decisions and deeper understanding of their own story. Kristan, thank you so much for being here today and making the time. I'm very excited to get to talk about the importance of understanding our own story, what that looks like, and exploring some of the tools that you have to help people with that.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and I do feel like this is such a important topic that has been important to me because the way that it has helped me just get awareness around who I am and get more comfortable with who I am, and also then move beyond and get to a place where I can also think about that person that I want to be and want to become. So stories are they've been around for as long as we've been around, right? As these just incredible teaching tool.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much purpose in that. And I feel I've heard someone say before, story is the language of the human heart. That's how we remember best. That's how we connect. So I am very excited to get to dive into this and learn more. So as we get started, can you share what first sparked your interest in helping people understand their own life story?
Yeah, it really started more of a little bit of a roundabout way in that I started business coaching many years ago and ended up building a practice for about a decade or so, where I was working primarily with independent business owners, very entrepreneurial people who were the founders and owners of their business. And I would usually meet them at a point where they had been doing their thing for a while and had hit a plateau of sorts, right? That there was a sense of stuckness. Mm-hmm. And as we'd get to know each other a little bit. And one of the things that I would always start with is I would ask people, what is your definition of success? Right? And so oftentimes people would give that definition of success that I think we might all be familiar with, at least here in the United States. I want to grow my business. I want to increase my reach. I want more profitability, more. And I was like, okay, that's great. And let's talk about what your personal definition is of success, right? And that really, in some ways, is a wonderful prompt for any of us, right? To think about what is a life of success, and if success is a word that is tricky, life of meaning or purpose for you, right? Yeah. And that's a question I feel like we could literally sit with for a year, because it is really the introduction of on the one hand, what are your hopes and dreams, right, that you have? And it's also asking you to think about your experiences and what you've learned. And even more so, I think a deeper layer is it gets into those inherited stories, right? Our history, and whether that's our history with our actual community that we grew up in and our parents or siblings, or that history of previous generations, right?
Yeah.
So that was really, in some ways, the start of the work that I do now. And thinking about stories in these three buckets, right? It's the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? And then it is those stories that we've inherited and some that we've acquired along the way, whether it was, you think about experiences that you may have had in school. And so there's also those acquired stories. And then there is the third bucket that I think about is the stories that we're willing to tell, the stories that we're willing to share, right? And that's where there is, depending on where we're at in our journey of self-discovery or our comfort level with ourselves, those can be stories that are very carefully constructed because we may not be at a point where we can lead with vulnerability. And I'm not saying that it's always, there are certain times that we don't have to lead with vulnerability too. I just want to be clear about that. I don't want anyone to be harmed by being vulnerable in places that are not safe. But so there's those times when we are feeling that we've got to craft this image, right? And the story that we share from that place. And then there's those stories are those ones that are the most connection point is when we can share from our heart. And in the best circumstances, that gives someone a glimpse into who we are that they may feel some alignment with. Or it just may be as simple as breaking down kind of whatever those assumptions that they may have around who we are just based on appearance or our position or, all the different letters that we may have or don't have after our names and all those things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. That's really helpful to hear just the origin of where this really started for you. And I can see how each of those phases or buckets, if you will, are really important because they do impact. And even what you're just talking about most recently, in the stories we're willing to share, how freeing it has been to find those safe spaces that I can really just practice being honest, like telling the truth about my experiences in reality and what I've gone through. I agree with you very much so on the vulnerability piece of not everybody's a safe person, and we have to use discretion. We have to use some wisdom in that and who we share this with. So we're not just completely laying ourselves bare in front of somebody that's going to just cause so much harm, but really the sacredness of finding those spaces and people, even if it's one person, to be able to just tell the truth about and share and practice saying, this is what I've experienced, even if it's from today or this past month, in the past year. There's one story I need to share and I want to share, and I'm going to practice telling it as honestly as I can. There's just this whole, without having to put on the pressure of, I have to find the silver lining and there has to be a positive spin on this. It's just being able to practice saying it how you feel, how you experienced it, without that fear of what's the judgment going to be on the other end, is so freeing and very helpful to then make sense of piecing together these other aspects of our lives and our stories, and then seeing more clearly the patterns and the themes that have emerged from it.
Right. And I love what you're saying, that honesty that is essentially best friend of vulnerability, right?
Yes.
And for myself, one of the other pieces, going backwards again to my business coaching days, is observing these people that I got to know very, very well and really, had a true relationship with in wanting to support them and seeing their genius, right? Because we were in this place where we could share very authentically those patterns that they were repeating. So despite saying, gosh, I want this, I guess there was a disconnect, right? Because they were saying, okay, I want this thing to happen, this goal, right, that I have for my business and my life. And then their actions would be this thing that was in direct opposition of actually getting to moving forward towards your goal. And so I really, after a while, I was thinking, gosh, what can I do to help my people? And I I thought, at least I've learned this, is that I'm not going to change people, right? And I also learned in terms of my own life that awareness was that starting point of any type of, if there was going to be the possibility of meaningful change, it needed to start with awareness. And so that's when I created my first journal, because it was set up to really suggest to people to journal on a regular basis. And in journal, the way that the instructions are is it's very specifically that you are, the beginning place of the journaling is to journal more as a non-judgmental observer, right? As a witness. Because just as, and thinking about what you're saying, just as we can monitor ourselves or restrict ourselves to what our story is that we're willing to share with other people because of judgment, I think that is even within ourselves, right? And so our ability to be honest with ourselves and not begin judging ourselves, right? I mean, there's, and particularly points in our life where that story that we've lived is a story where shame or guilt or humiliation is a piece of that, or grief, right? And so for us to be able to really lay bare those stories in a way that isn't about assigning blame or second guessing yourself or doing the hindsight, or doing what you were saying, trying to gloss over it and say, well, it all worked out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's such an important phase to be in and to go through, is what you just said. At that point, it didn't feel that. And I can tell the truth about it. I can be honest about that. And it's really remarkable to think about how much we do judge ourselves. It's not just the fear of what somebody else is going to judge us for, but it's really knowing, well, we do that to ourselves all day long. So then that can actually keep all of that in and hidden and keep us from even writing it down on a page.
Yeah.
Just if we're the only ones who are going to see that. So that's even a barrier to work through and a hurdle to be able to overcome and say, if I can practice this with me and shift more into observing this and getting to practice even a hint of compassion, that will help a ton.
Yes.
In it, I could see how it'd be a snowball effect, just like this huge, it will help to create that turning point that needs to happen for that change and transformation. So it's neat that you got to experience that with your coaching clients, with your business coaching clients, and seeing if I can use this tool, and they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones who are going to be answering the questions. What does that self-reflection, what does that level of honesty and awareness do in creating the changes that they're looking for?
Yeah. And the joke was on me too, because in the midst of, as I was creating this journal and in the midst of my work as a business coach, I was in my second marriage. It was a very, very unhappy place. And I had repeated a pattern myself because I could not face my own disappointment in myself for my first divorce, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was the one who needed my own, my own tools more than my clients, probably in some ways.
Yeah, such great, just insight even on that, of how at the same time that is fascinating to think of when we are working with people and helping them with their breakthrough. It really does help to bring some insight to our own lives and seeing these things. Even right now, I'm in a group, it's more of a group therapy type setting, and we meet every week. It's been amazing. I love it, but I hadn't done that in years, and I forgot just being able to hear somebody else share their story and hear and even watch that interaction go back and forth between the therapist and that client. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much insight in seeing and making sense of things in my own situation and my own story, which is incredible that happens just from observing and watching others, right? So, and pull that apart, piece it apart, which is just significant.
Yeah, because I think that I agree with you, and I do shake my head sometimes because I'm thinking it's always so easy, right, to see what's happening in the lives of other people, right? And we always have such great insight into, or maybe I'm speaking about myself, but I'm laughing because I was talking to one of my kids earlier in the day here, and I was teasing myself because I was like, I've got another great idea for you, right? And thinking, gosh, I've got this great idea. I'm so excited to share it with you because it's going to help move along your life in a way that you're going to really like, right? And I think that we're just funny creatures in that why it's so helpful to observe other people and particularly in a sacred space like a therapeutic, a truly therapeutic space, is we can make things so complicated when we're just in our own heads, right? And also, we're so limited in our own thinking that, I mean, we do a lot of, I remember one time, I don't know where I read this, but it was basically saying you pretty much have the same 100 thoughts each day that you had the day before, right? And that is why that exchange of story is so important. And it even can happen in that journaling place, because I'm a big believer in journaling with a pen and paper, right? So that it's a really, there's a kinesthetic element to it. Because I do think that also can just get you beyond, right?
Yes.
Your same old thinking.
It on paper, which honestly can be shocking, where you're like, oh my gosh, and it helps to gain at least a different perspective, because we don't realize how often when we have those same thoughts in our head, we do believe them and we do think that's reality and don't even really know how to question it. And so when we can finally interrupt that and be like, there's got to be something different, whether it is journaling, that is one of my favorite things too. I do it just about every day. And it's so helpful. It's so helpful to get all of that on paper, to look at it and then identify things and then question it and challenge this and be like, wait a second, or like flip back and be like, this is what I was thinking about or talking about yesterday. Those situations. Right. So I'm curious, when you're working with clients and they do begin reflecting on their life and their story, what patterns or themes do they often start to notice?
Yeah, probably the biggest one, or the most common theme, is one, ignoring their own wisdom, right? And particularly because most of my work is centered around in-person workshops now, and it's a mix of men and women, and it skews a little more heavily female. And I just think as women, an accepted societal construct of appropriate behavior that maybe it wasn't intended this way, but the way that it plays out is that we can ignore ourselves and silence ourselves. And so there's that sense of, I knew I had a feeling about this and I ignored it, right?
Yes.
So that is a real prevalent pattern, right?
Yeah, I could see that for sure. It's funny because the therapeutic group I'm in, it's the theme of women's intuition. And because it's so common for women in particular, and it can be in general for men too, but just to disconnect, to push it down, to not believe that sense of knowing. But I had this sense, I knew something was off, and then we can disconnect from that. And it is a challenge to reconnect. It's a challenge to learn to trust ourselves again. So I could see how that would show up as a pattern. And then you start to see these events and the memories. When this happened, this is when that, even the earliest memory of when it first happened, and then when it happened again, and those common themes. So in that, and being able to identify the patterns and recognize these themes, what are some of the benefits you see when people do notice that, and the changes that they then can start making as a result?
Well, I will say one of the other benefits, so along with recognition of patterns and with that common theme of recognizing where we've ignored ourselves, right? And similarly, it's a snowball effect of when we ignore ourselves, we begin to see those choices that we made that were really not in alignment with who we are. who we know ourselves to be, right? And then what goes on from there, and there can be anger, there can be, and so oftentimes, right, that anger it's really a reflection of ourselves, right? Being disappointed, that ignoring ourselves even creates more distance, because oftentimes when we make these choices and then we may express ourselves with anger, again, that outward facing, right? We're looking to blame or those things. And what I will say, the other thing that journaling allows for people to do, and whether it's your daily practice of journaling or if you're doing more of a prompted type of with a specific questions, the other pattern that you will see is that along the way, even when we are at our most disconnected, our most broken, there are these really beautiful moments of when things that we never could have expected happen. And I'm not trying to do the silver lining thing. I think what the practice of journaling can do, no matter what the modality, is that it can plant that seed of hope, of being able to gain some awareness around our own patterns, right? And also develop perhaps more comfort with our stories, right? Particularly if we are able to really enter into the space of journaling in that non-judgmental observer space, right? As a witness. But I will say one of the other real benefits that I don't know that I didn't necessarily have a name for this, but going back to talking about observing other people and how that gives us so much information, right, is in my journaling workshops and my other writing workshops that I host. The thing that's been so interesting is when we journal, and whether that is a daily practice or we're doing something with specific prompts that are asking us to think about different incidences or different times in our lives, that we begin to have some awareness around those unexpected outcomes. Mm-hmm. And particularly, I want to be careful because we've acknowledged that we don't want to silver lining everything, right? And so it's not about trying to, after the fact, create this silver lining and say, see, this is how great it turned out. But rather, what I'm talking about is that in the journaling, there is, and the more that you do it, you recognize where things happen in your life that you never could have imagined in that moment, right? Yeah. And going back to our limited thinking, that so much of our thinking and our processing of situations is based on our past experience. And I mean, we may be able to glean a little bit of, expand our thinking by reading or watching other people. And this is why that we're so much more comfortable with failure, so to speak, right? We may not like it, but it's familiar, and thereby there's a comfort in that familiarity because we can already game it out in our brain. And the beauty of journaling and doing any reflective exercises is it's very difficult to ignore that there are all these times when you had no idea that whatever was waiting on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the many benefits of journaling, but one of them with that, and what I think it does in being able to reflect and even look back at these different experiences and being able to acknowledge, like you said, yeah, that was really freaking hard. This was so difficult. I didn't actually know if I could get through this. I didn't know what would happen. And then seeing the outcome and these aspects that you never could have imagined, where there are some benefits or ways that really did benefit you or add to your life, or there was some quote good that came out of that. And it's not to gloss over, but to be able to acknowledge both, which then I have found when I go through other difficulties and other challenges where circumstantially it feels so out of my control. I know for me, my pattern has been in the past to go right into feeling helpless, powerless, like a victim really. And just like, there's nothing I can do to change it when you're just being swallowed up and you're drowning in your circumstances. And so being able to like really try to grow and break out of that cycle for me has helped tremendously to be able to reflect and look back and say, yeah, there's a lot of things that I can't control. I don't know how the outcome is going to go here. However, in the midst of it, there's certain choices I do have. And there's way I don't have to just lay down and be like, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. That's how I used to respond to things. However, that doesn't have to happen now and continue in the future. And so there is this mix of, I know I can ebb and flow and go with what does happen. And in the midst of it, where there's a lot out of my control, there's things I'll be able to like milk out of the situation and pull from and use to enhance my life in ways I can't see now, but I can trust the process and that I'll get there, even though I don't know what it's going to look like. But I know if that's happened before, or it's even happened for other people, it's possible that can happen for me. And so just that process of like working through this and like through journaling, it is so powerful. I'm curious if you can share any helpful prompts that you've used to help people identify patterns or these themes in their life.
Yeah, well, quickly, I want to really tease out one thing that you said, which I feel is really something that I find myself relying on too, especially in those times, as you mentioned, you just are drowning and there doesn't seem to be much control or right, that we're just at the will of all these circumstances there are always choices that we can make. And they can be little teeny tiny ones, right? So for anyone who's listening, and I would just encourage people, because I don't want to minimize how horrible it feels when you are in a place of overwhelm and grief or struggling with whatever the situation may be. And so I'm not minimizing how hard that is. And there are always little choices that we can make, right? And I do believe that does build on itself, right? And one of those choices could be, some days it could be that I'm going to get out of bed, right? Or I'm going to take a shower. It could be that. Some days it could be that I'm going to call a friend. And some days it could be that I'm going to go sit outside or something, right? But I would encourage, if you are feeling you're swallowing, just getting swallowed up in all of this life circumstance, that to find that toehold in one little choice.
Yes.
And in terms of journaling prompts, a couple of prompts that I just love, and these are ones that I can do. I never get tired of these. Is one of my favorite ones is write about a friendship that changed your life. And the reason why I love that is when I teach it and put that prompt out to a group, I encourage people to think about friendship as it can be a friendship of a moment, right? Or it could be a friendship of decades, right? So to play with the definition of friendship, right? And the beauty of that exercise, when you begin to think about that moment that you're going to reflect on, is a lot of times it's a wonderful mirror into qualities that you yourself have, right? Because we notice those things that essentially resonate with us, right? Yeah. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily express our qualities identically to our friends, but it's a wonderful way to remember just the possibility of kindness and connection with others, right? And also a way to remind ourselves of the person that we are because also sometimes in those times when you're just, or for myself, when I just have felt I'm really struggling, I really lose a sense of, that's when I can really lose a sense of who I am.
Yes, and we need that reminder. And That's a great prompt because I hadn't thought of that before, but immediately when you said it, I thought of a friend and I was like, oh my gosh, and how powerful that is to even just help us navigate or as we go through different seasons of life and different, whether it's hardships or not, or if we're stuck or not, or it's great, like, but it's still so helpful. I could see in the midst of particularly like a harder time, being able to see somebody that's just like, we too often forget, and we forget who we are. We forget these aspects about ourselves, but then being able to see it in somebody else, be like, hold on, like I need to remember. I remember this person, and I need to remember that these are similar qualities that I do possess and I do have. They're just probably buried in the midst of what I'm going through right now. And I've got to remember, recover that.
I think Another prompt that I kind of is fun for me is I have a prompt in one of my workshops that invites people to write about a time that they broke the rules. And that can mean, I was just rereading my response because when I'm in my own workshop, I feel I need to be participating too, right? And so what I wrote about is like when I initiated the divorce with my kid's dad. I broke the rule of my one set of grandparents who ended up being married for 73 years, right? We weren't supposed to do this. And I broke the rule for my other grandmother who hadn't had a long-term marriage, and I was supposed to do better, right? I was that generation that was meant to represent her in a way that showed, accomplishment. And I broke the rule with myself, right? Because I didn't listen to myself when I was having doubts before we got married, and I just felt I had to go along with it because we were engaged, and I just continued to ignore myself for about 11 years until I couldn't anymore. And I felt failure.
Yeah, that's another really powerful prompt because it's interesting even hearing you say that there's that theme, right, of ignoring yourself and then getting to the point where like, I can't anymore. Like this level of denying myself what I see, what I feel, what I know is going on. It can't continue. And what's really powerful is in these prompts, and when we do look at these themes and patterns, is it does enable us to create change and to actually break out of that and see a new way forward, because that is one of the big benefits that I keep coming back to, is just having that level of awareness and getting to name the themes, name the patterns. Then I literally have been able to be like, oh my gosh, stop and see, whoa, this is about to happen again.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen again. And part of that's been like knowing my story, knowing where that comes from, recognizing what's familiar, these familiar feelings in my body of where I've known intuitively something's off, but I just didn't trust it and I dismiss it. Coming back to that, it has been so empowering to be able to create the changes that I really needed, but I just couldn't get there without doing this work and reflecting. And there's the individual type of work you're talking about with journaling and needing other people. We have to have other people to help us see our blind spots, see things that we just cannot. So I'm glad that you brought this up, and I'm really grateful for the work that you do. As we are coming to a close, I would love it if you could share with listeners where they could find you to connect with you and learn more.
Yeah, probably the best place is KristanSwan.com. It's my website, and the journal that I referenced is there, and there's different, I write weekly and put that up on the website, and also in-person events are posted there. And of course, you can also find smaller bits of things that I have to say on Instagram and the different socials, but you can start with the website.
Amazing. Oh man. Well, thank you so much for providing that. I'm so glad that there are so many resources available. I did look on your website and I saw different types of journal prompts, different, like you said, in-person events and different things, meeting people where they're at, which is huge. So,
well, and we have fun too. I want to, it's just to round out what you were saying, the beauty of coming back to your own wisdom and then beginning to trust yourself is, I feel it ends up being this path forward that essentially allows all of us to do less harm, right? Because when we are acting and making choices based on our truth, we're doing better by ourselves, but we're also doing better by extension, right? Because we're not committing to things that probably aren't a good fit for us. And so I think that there's a way that, I guess what I always like to say is self-discovery is not selfish. There is this beautiful positive ripple effect that happens when you know yourself and trust yourself and act in alignment.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's really good. And I love that phrase. I love the line that you share with that, because it is so true. And it does start with ourselves. We can do this, but it does have such a huge impact on our kids and the generations to come. We can create significant change in how we have to honor and value ourselves enough to go do the work for ourselves. So yeah, well, thank you so much, Kristan, for taking the time today to be on. And I'm just so grateful we did get to have this conversation. And I'm glad that I'm just excited for other women who are going to get to hear this and people in general to benefit from your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Well, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And remember that you are not alone. Thanks so much for listening. I cannot wait to talk with you next time. Thanks for listening to Let's Get Real. If you've been feeling stretched thin, stuck in survival mode, or like you've lost yourself in motherhood, I made something just for you. It's called the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide, and it's totally free. Inside, I walk you through simple steps to help you reconnect with who you are, find a bit more breathing room in your day, and start to feel like you again. You can grab it now. Just click the link in the show notes. You don't have to keep doing this alone. Let's take the next step together.